Theory of hip hop. Hey, we're in the second to last part of our series 316. Next week is going to be our last sort of conclusive end all, crescendo to this series. Let's start today, though, by reading the verse itself together, all right? With one voice. 1, 2, 3. For God so loved the world that he gave his only son, that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have eternal life. And so what I hope you've been learning about what Jesus has been teaching Nicodemus about and us by means of Nicodemus is that this first portion of this verse is not maybe what you commonly thought it was about. I grew up thinking that this first section was saying that that God just being this God who just loves everybody and loves everything just the way that it is. But as we did a little more investigating, we learned that the word love there isn't the same kind of love that a parent has for kids, which is imperfect, or a friend has for a friend, which is imperfect, or a lover has for another lover, which is also imperfect. But we learned hopefully that the love that is used here, the word for love, is a morally pure and just and perfect kind of love, a kind of love that only someone as holy and perfect and divine as God can give and receive. And therefore, this verse cannot mean, certainly that first half cannot mean that God so loved the world as is today, because the world today is broken, isn't it? Isn't there suffering in the world every time you turn on the TV? Man, I don't know if you guys know about this, but this morning even, crazy, horrific news, all these missionaries being kidnapped in Haiti. Every time you open the news, there's something horrible happening constantly. And so surely a holy, pure God cannot love perfectly and morally and justly this broken world. And thankfully, that's not what the word world means. But we also learned, hopefully, that the word world is actually a word that means the world that was, the world that God had envisioned and God had created in Genesis 1, the world that was broken because of sin in Genesis 3. And so even that word so there, actually, it doesn't indicate quantity. It actually indicates it's more of a descriptor word. It's not saying God so loved the world so much. It's saying God loved the world, therefore, that kind of a so, right? My man. So it's like a so in that kind of conjecture sense, right? So God so pure, morally perfectly loved that perfect world he created in Genesis 1. What did he do? He sent his son Jesus. And so Jesus didn't just come, and the story of Jesus isn't just about the forgiveness of your sins, but it's about God restoring that which was broken in Genesis 3. But because it's a work done by Jesus, it's even better. In Genesis 1, when God created Eden and God created Adam and Eve, things were great. There was no conflict. Adam and Eve loved each other. Adam and Eve loved God. God loved them. There's indication that they would walk in the afternoons together. There was perfect fellowship and harmony. There was no infanticide. There was no racism, sexism, classism. There was no suffering and pain. And God loved that world that he created so much that he wants to restore it. And so he sends his son to do that very thing. And the glimpse of that world is found in Revelation 21. Emma, would you be willing to read this for us? I'll pass you the mic here.
Then I saw I can't see.
You want to come up a little bit?
Sure.
Stand over here and stand up. You're good.
Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. And I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. As I heard a loud voice coming from the throne saying, "Behold, the dwelling place of God is with man. He will dwell with them, and they will be his people, and God himself will be with them as their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more. Neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain anymore, for the former things have passed away." And he who has seated on the throne said, Behold, I am making all things new. Also, he said, Write this down, for these words are trustworthy and true. And he said to me, It's done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. To the thirsty I will give from the spring of water of life without pavement. The one who conquers will have this heritage, and I will be his God, and he will be my son. But as for the cowardly, the faithless, and the detestable, as for murderers, the sexually immoral, sorcerers, I can't see that, idolaters, and liars, their portion will be in the lake that burns with fire and sulfur, which is the second death.
Thank you. That was a long one. Thank you for doing that. So John has given us obviously a very metaphorical preview of what Jesus said he came to do. What is the new heavens and the new earth going to look like? What is this restorative work going to look like? It's going to look like that. And even when we read that, we're like, what is a world without pain and suffering, without mourning, M-O-U, mourning, look like? I don't know. We don't know. And in fact, even the people right now in heaven, the souls in heaven don't even know yet too, because this new world that Jesus is about to create is not just a reflection of heaven, but it's heaven and earth merged and married together like a husband and a wife. Isn't that crazy? And what's even crazier about that is, as we talked about last week, access to that world doesn't come by you having grand gestures of faithfulness, but it comes by means of something so much simpler, by a conclusive belief that if you just believe that it is, then it is yours. You know, I had this slide in last week, and I probably should have kept it in because I think there was some confusion about the differentiation between belief and faith. So let me just give you a quick illustration. I've heard one pastor say it like this: if I'm falling off a cliff and I see a tree branch and I don't grab the tree branch, what's going to happen? I'm going to fall. I'm going to die. I'm going to fall to my death. What happens if I do grab the tree branch? I probably won't. Yeah. The point of the illustration being you won't die because you're going to grab the tree branch. The belief is in the knowledge that if I don't grab that tree branch, I'm dead. I may not fully know that grabbing that tree branch is going to save me, but at least I do know and do believe conclusively, if I don't do anything, I'm dead. That's belief. Faith is, oh, is that branch going to be prickly or not? Or how long do I have to hang there? Or do I even want to live, right? Things like those are more esoteric, they're more nebulous. They take time and process, right? But the problem, I think, with a lot of Christians these days, and the reason we did last week's message is, it's like we have two boxes. There's a faith box and a belief box. And you put your chemistry, you put your physics, you put your science in the belief box. That's why you think it's so true. But you put your God in your faith box. And the moment something wrong happens, guess what happens? You reside on your beliefs. And if God is not in your beliefs, well, we end up saying things like, oh, he lost his faith. Or we stop believing in God. Because we turned something that should have been a belief into purely a faith thing, okay? Faith takes time. Your trust in God takes time. But the existence of God and that God is the God of the Bible is it's not something that should progress over time. That should just be. And that's what Jesus is saying. Jesus is saying the experience and encounter of this new heaven and new earth is for those who just conclusively put God in the belief box. Yeah, it takes time to put God in the faith box, but you have to believe in God to experience all that God is doing. And I think that makes sense. And in fact, I need to say this too. All throughout Jesus's life, this is not new information. All throughout his life, he says this over and over again. And this is why this moment, this conversation with Nicodemus is so transformative, as we saw a couple of weeks ago. It's because what Jesus is telling Nicodemus, again, is I'm not just here to forgive you of your sins. I'm here to recreate who you are as a person, and I'm here to recreate your world. He does that again earlier on in the book of John with a woman at a well. She's yearning for redemption and healing in her life, and her life has been sexually broken. She's been abandoned and abused by multiple men, and so she's yearning for restoration, and all of her restoration was sealed up into God. And here Jesus or rather not here, in John 4, Jesus sits with her and says, the person that you have all your hopes wrapped up in is sitting right here having a conversation with you. And that's what he's saying to Nicodemus too. He's not saying to Nicodemus, I'm here to me to just kind of help you along your way. He's saying, I'm here to create a new way. The God that you believe actually exists is sitting here having a conversation with you. And if you believe in him, then all that he is doing is obviously going to be yours. That's the profound nature of what Jesus is doing. Likewise, when Jesus heals people, when he raises people from the dead, he's not doing that because he's a good guy. He's trying to give you a glimpse of the work that he's ultimately devoted to. He's trying to give you a taste of a new heavens and a new earth where there is no disease, where there is no death. That's why he does what he does for 3 years on this earth. And the good news, and in fact, I should say the great news of all of that is contingent, not on massive amounts of faith, but on simple, conclusive belief. That you can actually be someone with really weak faith and yet be an inheritor. You can be a son and a daughter who inherits all of these promises, all the work of God in Jesus Christ. And that's great news. And that needs to be transformative. I don't know what is more transformative than that. And we see that when Nicodemus, his whole life is flipped inside out. But here's the difference between Nicodemus and I think the modern 21st century Asian American sitting in this room, okay? The reason I think for some of you who grew up at John 3:16, the reason I think this verse hasn't been as transformative for you as it was for Nicodemus and perhaps many others is because as good as this news is, unfortunately, the way that you hear it isn't as good news. Most of you probably heard this great news as just news. Some of you, if not most of you, grew up hearing the great news of the gospel as just neutral news. And the reason I think that you hear it and receive it that way is because you haven't heard the bad news. And sort of intertwined in the good news of even this verse, unfortunately, is some uncomfortable bad news. Because the way Jesus says, uses this word perish, I want you to just hear that, try to catch this. He's saying this dramatic cosmic thing. God loved the world that he gave his son to restore all things. And whoever believes in him is going to inherit all that and not perish. And so if you're tracking through this conversation, I mean, if you just read it, our response should be, what? Where did the word perish come from? Why is Jesus suddenly talking about perishing? I thought we were talking about new creation. I thought we were talking about no pain, no suffering. What are you talking about? Perish? Because entwined and assumed, rather, I should say, in Jesus's teaching of the new heaven and the new earth is the bad news that everybody deserves to perish, or rather that nobody deserves the new creation. You know, Emma just read this new created world, and the first 3 slides of that reading were this promises of a perfect, just healed, healthy, holistic experience of life. But that 4th slide, I don't know if you caught it, that she read, it said, yeah, but if for those who are idolaters, sorcerer, meaning you just believe, you essentially idolize your works over faith in God. Anybody who's guilty of lust and adultery and greed, to those people, no, the promise is forbidden. And so there's this presumption even there. The new heavens and new earth, it doesn't belong to anybody then, because we're all like that. Jesus is assuming and asserting in this teaching some bad news. And the bad news is that everybody, unfortunately, deserves to perish. And I know that's uncomfortable news, because most of us, we don't wake up thinking, I'm going to have a really bad day today. I really want to suffer today. But in fact, when suffering does come our ways, most of us get surprised. Most of us get really uncomfortable with that. But there are 2 reasons why Jesus suggests, honestly, if we're honest with ourselves, the reality is we all deserve to perish. The first reason is, and it's not in the text, we're going to go to different places, but the first reason is, I think, found here, and I'm just going to quickly just summarize it. Jesus is having dinner, his last dinner with his disciples the night before he's going to be betrayed. And check out what he says. As they were eating, he said, "Truly, I say to you, one of you will betray me." But Judas was sitting right there. Didn't he know Judas was going to betray him? So why didn't he just say, "Judas is the one that's going to betray me. Get him"? He did. Why does he say, "One of you will betray me"? And in fact, the reason he does so is articulated here. And they were very sorrowful and began to say to him and one another, "Is it me? Am I the one?" The reason he doesn't say, "It's Judas, get him," is because he knows everyone has the capacity to do what Judas ultimately did and does. That if you're sitting here thinking, "I would never do what Judas would did. I would never sell Jesus out for 30 pieces of silver, the common cost of a slave." Jesus is saying, no, you would. And in fact, every day that you sin, you do. In fact, every sin you do is an act of betrayal to Jesus. And we see this all throughout the Bible, don't we? We see Adam and Eve betray God for some fruit. We see Israelites in the desert betray God for a golden calf. We see in the same idiot Israelites in the promised land betray God for a king that looks like the kings around them, even though God just totally annihilated them. For King David, he betrayed God for Bathsheba. The first reason we all deserve to perish, the reason why innate in John 3:16 is language that assumes that we all need to perish, is number one, because we all betray Jesus daily. We proactively disobey him. But the second reason we deserve to perish, and this is, again, is found all throughout the Bible. The second reason is because not only are you capable of being Judas, you're also capable of being Peter. So as Jesus is being interrogated and beaten by the Sanhedrin, Peter's outside trying to warm himself around the fire. And some of you know this story. And he denies Jesus 3 times. And so Jesus is on that same night while they're having dinner, he's trying to tell and warn Peter of this. And he says, Peter said to him, though they fall away because of you, I will never fall away. And Jesus said to him, I tell you, this very night before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. And Peter said to him, even if I must die with you, I will not deny you. And the disciples said the same thing. And yet, a couple of verses later, what do? They all run. One guy even runs naked, probably Mark. The second reason Jesus assumes that we all need and deserve to perish, number one, because every day we betray Jesus for something else. We betray Jesus for our own comforts, our own leisures. But the second reason is because we fail to follow Jesus. Not only do we proactively disobey Jesus, we fail to proactively obey Jesus. So Jesus will say things like, don't just not hate, but love your neighbor. So it's one thing to not hate your neighbor. It's a whole nother thing to love your neighbor. And the reason he says one is for the other. Likewise, he says, don't lie, is something he commonly says, for the purpose of telling the truth. So it's one thing to say at the end of the day, well, I didn't lie today, but Jesus would ask you, but did you tell the truth? Did you tell the truth today? And if you said no, that's just the same thing. You see what I'm saying? So there's 2 layers to this. And the reason Jesus, again, is assuming that we all deserve to perish, it's because of sin. And the 2 components of sin are, number one, betray Jesus, and number 2, fail to follow Jesus. The nerdy terms for this, sins of omission and commission, which we've talked about numerous times. And therefore, what is the right, just thing for God to do? Of course, he should let us all perish. The very thing that you and I deserve every single day is not the first half of this verse. It's that one single word right there, perish. Because every day we betray Jesus. Every day we proactively don't obey Jesus. And that should have been the end of the story, my friends. That should be done. That's it. A good, moral, just God should say, that's it, the end. But the good news is that it's not. Isaiah prophesies one of the works of Christ by saying, surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows. Yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. Upon him was a chastisement that brought us peace, and with his wounds we are healed. All we Everybody here, like sheep have gone astray. We have turned everyone to his own way. We have betrayed Jesus. We have failed to obey Jesus, and the Lord has laid on him, however, the iniquity of us all. And later on, Paul would echo these words by saying, for our sake, God made Jesus to be sin who knew no sin, so that in him, you and me, betrayers and deniers of Jesus, might become the righteousness of God. All right, listen carefully, my friends. Do you know what it means to be a Christian? Do you know what this verse is suggesting a Christian is? Is not just someone who has had his or her sins subtracted, but it's also someone who has had Christ's righteousness added. And that's what Jesus did on that cross. That's what Jesus is promising in 3:16, because you see the same thing in 3:16. You see a subtraction for whoever believes. You see a subtraction, not perish, and you have an addition, have eternal life. And if you believe, not perfect faith. Again, don't confuse faith and belief. Don't say, I don't know if I'm a Christian because I still cuss and smoke and whatever. God's like, that's a faith thing. That's not a belief thing. Okay. I don't wake up and say, I don't know if gravity exists today because I feel, no, gravity exists. It just is. It's a belief thing. Don't conflate the two. And so my invitation, and Jesus' primary invitation to you today is this. Your faith is imperfect. It's going to be imperfect. I'm sorry. You would think you're going to have great faith your whole life, even if you go to ministry with, no. You're going to struggle with sin forever. And, well, so long as you're on earth. But today, what you can do is you can believe. A very simple, yeah, I believe. Many years ago, so I've been doing this for some years, and anytime I present the gospel to people, especially privately, one-on-one or one-on-two, I see a lot of different responses, most of which is kind of like emotionally unpacking and like unraveling. And so I'll see a lot of people really cry and like, oh, I feel so ashamed. I mean, the gospel is so amazing. And sometimes I see that. Once in a while, though, I'll share the gospel and I'll see a totally different response. I'll see anger. And so many years ago, I took on one of my students, and she had been wrestling with the idea of the gospel for a long, long time. And so that night, I felt like, man, just break it down to her again. So I did. Just told her essentially what I told you. And she said to me, are you saying, we're sitting in front of her house and parked the car, and she's like, are you saying all you got to do is believe that the work of my sin, all my sins being subtracted and Christ's righteousness added, you saying that experience of that is just by believing? That's all I got to do is believe? I was like, yeah, isn't that good news? And she's like, no. And she stormed out of my car. And as she stormed out of my car, she said, that's too easy. Can't be that easy. And I don't know, maybe you're like her. I think I find myself in her shoes sometimes, where I feel sometimes so guilty for something I've done. When someone tells me all you got to do is believe, I'm like, it can't be. What about these feelings that I have in my heart? What about this guilt that I carry? What about the shame that I have? And the gospel of Jesus, I know, it's about belief. See, the reason she couldn't believe and stormed out, it's not because of a lack of evidence. It's because of a refusal of evidence. It's because she was proud. And my wondering is this: how many of us, some of the people you know, still aren't believers because of pride? Because we don't have the humility to just believe. We have enough humility to say gravity exists, but we don't have the humility to say God exists and God is good. Even though I'm not, even though I'm so not, God is. My invitation, my friends, today, believe. Jesus' invitation to you in this series is, would you believe? And would you root your faith, your Christian faith, not in great gestures of faithfulness, but in the simplicity of belief? Because this is not good methodology. This is simply good news. Believe it. That's it. Let me pray for us. Heavenly Father, I pray that you would make believers out of us in this room. I pray that in order to do that, though, would you clarify, Lord, faithfulness versus belief? Um, that we wouldn't only think you exist when we feel like you exist, but to just believe, especially when we don't feel your presence or feel like you're in control. Help us to lean on our belief that you are. Even if I don't feel like gravity exists, I know it is. I know it's real. Even if I don't think a certain fire is hot, it is. And that's what it is. So help us to simplify our belief in those kind of conclusive terms. And would you, in this space, in this room, bring about a certain kind of humility that allows us to become not just faithful followers. Certainly we pray for that, but what we want first and foremost are just believers. So help us to believe, Lord, I pray.